Welcome back everybody to another reaction video. So today we're going to be checking out a new channel that I've not covered before called Knowledgia. I think that's how you pronounce it, Knowledgia. I've watched just one or two videos by them, but the content they produce is really well done. So we're going to be looking at a video called How Was England Formed, which is an interesting topic. It's something that I know a little bit about, but you know, it's not kind of like my main area or anything, so it's something that we can certainly learn together with, but as always I'll try and offer a perspective where I can. Just a quick couple of things before we start. So if you want to support the channel, as always, please leave a like and leave a comment as well. I'm challenging everybody that watches these videos now to leave a comment with something that you learned either from the original video that's playing or from my reaction to it as well, and just get some conversations going in the comments. If you've got something that you would like to see me react to, you can pop that in the comments as well, and I can check out those channels in the future. But also, if you want to support the channel some more, I do have a Patreon page, and there's a link in the channel's info description, so you can go check that out. But let's dive straight in. So this is Knowledgia, and again, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. This is How Was England Formed?
The existence of England is one that is often taken for granted and looked at far too scarcely. This may be due to the overshadowing history of the development of Great Britain and the United Kingdom. But nonetheless, in order for these unions to be formed, England had to already exist, and it actually has since 927 AD. So how was England created? Who claimed the land before the English, and how did it become the nation that we know today? As the Roman Empire began to fade from the British Isles, the area of modern-day England started to see a wave of migration from Anglo-Saxon Germanic tribes.
And this is a topic that we're looking at with the reactions that I'm doing to History Matters. We've just done early and late Roman Britain, so go check those out as well, and check out the original videos too for more information on this part of history.
According to some historians, after the Romans left, the native Britons came under attack from the nearby Picts and Scots, and subsequently...
Just a small note, because I think some people might look at that and think, why are the Scots coming from Ireland? But at this point in history, the Scots, because the Scots are an Irish tribe, you know, they came from Ireland. They migrated across this sort of narrow channel here and into Ireland, into Scotland, sorry. Scotland at the time was occupied, as he said, by a tribe called the Picts, or the Pictish. And now if you actually go to sort of Northern Ireland today, the Northern Irish accent is actually quite similar to kind of like a Southern Scottish accent. So there's kind of still at least an audible link, I guess, between Ireland and Scotland in that sense, but they're both Gaels, they're both, you know, Celts, they're both Celtic tribes. So the Scots were an Irish tribe at this point, but they would migrate much later.
Welcome some of these Anglo-Saxons in hopes that they would push out the other invaders. The Germanic peoples were successful in expelling both the Scots and Picts, but they then turned on the native Britons and...
Yeah, so that's something else to remember as well. This does happen quite routinely through history, actually. There's quite a few examples of this happening. The Romans kind of did something similar. They were under attack by these barbarian tribes, what they would call barbarian tribes all the time, and they ended up hiring them as mercenaries. You know, the English would do that later with the Vikings. You know, so it's not that uncommon if a much stronger enemy, in air quotes, enemy attacks sort of your land. It's not that uncommon to think, well, we're also under attack by these other folks, and you know, these people, you know, they seem to be much stronger, so we will ally with them in the hopes that we can forge some kind of lasting relationship with them. It really works, as we'll see here.
Established their own authority by the start of the 7th century. The new Anglo-Saxon rulers then installed the kingdoms of Essex, Kent, Sussex, Mercia, East Anglia, Northumbria, and Wessex on the British mainland. There are minimal records of what happened over the next few centuries throughout these kingdoms, but we do know that it wouldn't be long before the Anglo-Saxons would face invaders of their own. In 793, a Viking army landed at the Lindisfarne Monastery and raided the sacred building. Their
I'd hesitate to call it an army. It was more a raiding party, because army kind of evokes a sense of scale that isn't really necessarily what was happening here, but that's just a very, very small point.
violence and disrespect stunned the Anglo-Saxons, who were unprepared for what these Vikings had in store. By the end of 870, East Anglia fell to the Danish invaders, and Mercia was lost only 4 years later. As the Vikings seized Northumbria next in 875, Wessex was the only remaining major kingdom under Anglo-Saxon authority.
That's an interesting thing to point out as well, is that for a long time Mercia was actually the most powerful of the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms by far, and just after this constant kind of battering that they're taking at the hands of the Vikings, because if you look geographically, they're at a much higher risk of a Viking assault, because the Vikings would be sailing across the North Sea and landing on the east coast of England, whereas they would have to kind of sail through the channel. You could land here maybe, but there's a lot of cliffs around here. You've got like the White Cliffs of Dover, for example, so it's not particularly ideal landing ground. You would have to sail all the way through the channel and invade sort of from the south. It was much easier to invade up here because you've got there's a lot of sort of accessible beaches and coves on this sort of coast of England here, and you've also got access to major rivers. You've got the Humber estuary, which comes out around here, and that kind of links to two major rivers. It links to the River Ouse, which goes up the north and goes to York, which was the capital of Northumbria, and it links to the River Trent, which goes south, and there's a town on the Trent called Gainsborough, which is kind of like, for a long time it was the only major bridge across the River Trent, so it was the access point between sort of the east and west halves of the English Midlands. So it was much more attractive for the Vikings to attack up here, but what that means is it gives Wessex much more breathing room than any of the other Anglo-Saxon kingdoms had.
Current king of Wessex, Ethelred, died. His younger brother, Alfred, was left to protect his kingdom's independence. At first, he did so by paying off the Viking aggressors, until he was eventually prepared to lead an army against them.
That was a very common strategy as well for sort of getting the Vikings off your back, because if you think the Vikings are here to raid, they're here for things that they can sell, essentially. So what's one way to sort of appease them? Pay them a lot of money, but in a way that only kind of enticed more raids, because if you pay off your enemy now knows that you're wealthy. So they're going to keep coming back, and they're going to keep extorting as much as they can out of you.
This culminated in the Battle of Edington, which left the Danes utterly routed and ended their attempts to capture Wessex. A power vacuum in Mercia around the same time resulted in King Alfred also gaining control of the kingdom, and instead of establishing a new monarch, he placed an alderman in charge. This nobleman would answer to King Alfred himself, and kept the King of Wessex as the ultimate authority throughout both regions, although a part of Mercia would be ceded to the Vikings. After the death of the King of Wessex and the contemporary leader of Mercia in 911, Edward the Elder and Ethelfled each became the respective successors. Together, these new rulers began to increase the pressure that had already been put on the neighboring Danelaw. In 917, Ethelfled expanded her lands to the north, and Edward was able to incorporate all of East Anglia into his kingdom. As Ethelfled pushed forward with the expansion, she managed to extend Mercian territory all the way up to York, where the locals decided it would be best to simply pledge loyalty to her as opposed to fighting. Although Ethelfled shortly died, her daughter, Elfwin, was supposed to take her place and continue on the current course. Unexpectedly, though, the Mercian people quickly ousted their new leader and accidentally created the perfect opportunity for King Edward from Wessex to seize all of Mercia not long after. In 918, the Anglo-Saxons continued farther into Danelaw territory and slowly gained more and more land for themselves. By the time of Edward's death in 924, the newly acquired neighbors of the Anglo-Saxons had all pledged allegiance to the king. This put the Anglo-Saxons in a confident position as Edward's son, Aethelstan, took over the kingdom. Around this time, Ethelton's sister would marry the local Viking ruler Sitrick, who still controlled Northumbria. Ethelstan marched on and was finally able to bring the Kingdom of York under his crown as his sister's husband passed away. This left Northumbria up for grabs, and the king swiftly consolidated it as part of his kingdom.
That's an emerging pattern as well through history, is that kingdoms in their entirety sometimes are rarely conquered by military force. What you need is a power vacuum, because then you've got multiple competing factions, and if they're all competing, they're not united. And that's actually something that helped the Vikings in the early stages, which was that there were many, many different Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, all with their own agendas, all with their own politics, all with their own sort of ideas on what they should do about the problem of the Viking raids. So they were all squabbling amongst each other, so it made them easy pickings for the Viking invaders. But when you conquer all that territory, you've removed those political barriers, and you're left with just one major opponent, which was Wessex. Wessex, as I said before, was kind of largely untouched by the Viking raid, so you've just kind of removed the advantage you had, essentially, and that's exactly what the Anglo-Saxons of Wessex eventually did to the Vikings in return.
This is generally the time that most historians view the Kingdom of England as having been created. But the situation was not exactly so simple. Ethelstan was not done trying to expand his kingdom however he could, and although he did term himself the King of the English at this point, it was still not quite what we know as England today. Ethelstan decided to give an invasion of Scotland a chance to see if he could reach his authority even further. The Kingdom of Scotland, or as it was known at the time, Alba, was at a disadvantage against the English, and therefore appealed to the other remaining sovereign states for assistance. This prompted an alliance between Constantine II, King of Alba, Olaf Guthrum, King of Dublin, and Owain, King of Strathclyde. With King Olaf at the helm, the alliance faced the English at the spectacular Battle of Brunanburh. Though it is unknown exactly where this battle took place, it is certain that the alliance was severely crushed by the English invaders. The casualties on both sides was disastrously high, but Ethelstan and the English were without a doubt the victors. It's believed by many that this clash may have truly solidified the unity of England and stirred up a new sense of nationalism and pride amongst the English people.
Just a small note on that as well is that when he uses the word nationalism, nationalism as a concept as we understand it today, where you've got kind of this sort of centralized belief on nationhood, on what actually a nation is and what constitutes that particular nation. If you say to somebody, France, describe France to me, it's a specific kind of culture and heritage, as opposed to if you were to say, describe Italy to me or describe China to me. But back at this time, nationalism, as we understand it, did not exist. As a concept, the modern form of nationalism, it didn't come about until it was starting to emerge in the 1700s, but it didn't really become a solid force until the early 1800s. So nationalism at this time, it was much more predicated on things like loyalty to your lord, who was then loyal to a king. And so borders, sure, you had borders of kingdoms, but they weren't defined in the same ways that we define them today. It wasn't based on kind of shared cultural heritage or anything like that. So just keep that in mind when talking about kind of nationalism I would say anywhere pre-1800 really.
Nonetheless, it didn't result in the incorporation of Alba nor Strathclyde into the Kingdom of England, as both stayed independent. England, on the other hand, would have to prove its ability to do so. The Vikings, though temporarily defeated, would return to the young kingdom at the end of the 10th century. After Ethelstan's death in 939, the previously defeated King of Dublin, who was a Viking ruler, took immediate advantage of England's temporary instability. While King Ethelstan's brother Edmund took over the English realm, King Olaf swooped in to reconquer some of the lands that had once been in Viking hands. York was quickly captured, and a large chunk of what used to be Northumbria and Mercia was also taken, as he strong-armed the English into accepting this annexation. Ironically, when Olaf died in 941 and his cousin, who shared the same name, was transitioning to the throne as his successor, Edmund of England jumped on the chance to pay the Vikings back for the invasion.
Again, taking advantage of a power vacuum. This is really smart on their part because they're buying their time. They're not just running headlong into an ill-thought-out attack. They're actually playing like a long game. They're thinking, well, sure, they might rule this for several years, even decades, but later down the line, we will get it back.
The following year, the middle chunk of annexed land was retaken by the English, and in only 2 more years, the Vikings were entirely pushed out of Northumbria. This essentially reunited England, since the territory was now all under Edmund's control. As ambitious as his ancestors, Edmund next invaded Strathclyde, but only took some of its southern territories by the end of the incursion. The rest was given to King Malcolm I of Scotland, as opposed to joining England. It once again appeared as though the Kingdom of England had established some stability. But this was once more short-lived. Edmund was mysteriously murdered in 946, which left his younger brother, Edred, as King of England. The next year, Eric Bloodaxe from Norway attacked.
Just a small note, but what a fantastic name. I would kill to have a name like that.
And seized the recently reincorporated Northumbria, which prompted almost a decade of conflicts over who, throughout the Isles, would lead Northumbria. Eventually, the English king was able to once again and permanently reclaim the territory on behalf of England. His death soon ended his reign after this victory, and his young nephew Edwig temporarily succeeded him, but was quickly deposed in favor of his brother Edgar. However, this was only a partial deposition, which meant that Edwig would still hold a small section of the kingdom as a co-ruler. When Edwig died only 2 years after this decision, Edgar simply took over the whole of England. Under the reign of King Edgar, known as Edgar the Peaceful, the true foundations of the English kingdom could finally be established. Many reforms were passed, and a vast number of the systems and laws that had existed in the Danelaw were actually upheld, in hopes of avoiding any displeasure from the Danish portion of the population. Peace, unity, and order were the pillars of Edgar's nearly 2-decade-long reign.
That's interesting that he says that about because we think of like the Vikings being defeated and they were pushed out. No, because the Vikings weren't just raiders, they were colonizers. They were there to live, they were there to settle. And while there were many massacres of the Scandinavian populations in England, if you go sort of around sort of north of kind of this line here, there's a stark difference in kind of like the naming of settlements. You tend to have a lot of different sort of suffixes on place names, and those are derived from Scandinavian ones. And you've also, even down to things like people's names, people's surnames. My surname in real life is actually descended from the Normans, who were Vikings. It's got that kind of Scandinavian link to it. So even people, of that kind of this sort of region in the north of England, you can still find a lot of Scandinavian influence. It's quite surprising.
And his work helps to fully solidify the unity of the young Kingdom of England. The ultimate foundation of England was a long and shaky process. From the initial immigration of the Anglo-Saxons into the region to the establishment of their first kingdoms, extending into the invasion and rule of the Vikings, it wasn't until the Anglo-Saxons began to seize territory from the Danelaw that an inkling of modern-day England could be seen. After a series of conquering, being conquered, reconquering, and so on, the Anglo-Saxons eventually united the existing kingdoms throughout England. From there, it was merely a matter of establishing solid borders, maintaining their captured territory in order to keep their kingdom physically solid, and eventually, under the rule of Edgar the Peaceful, building the foundational laws and structures of what we know now as the Kingdom or Nation of England.
Alright, that was a fantastic little video, and one thing I will say is the production value here is just really, really top notch. You know, just the animations at play. I like how, you know, when there was that bit about the English and the Danes fighting, you know, kind of seesawing back and forth over that territory in Northumbria, you could see like it was kind of like fading in and out of being black and red. You know, just little visual details like that that really kind of make the point that they're trying to get across pop a little bit more. So, as always, there will be a link in the description to the original video and to the channel, so please go check them out and give them a subscribe. And as always, if you want to support my channel, please like, comment, subscribe as well. Make sure notifications are on. There's reaction videos twice a week, Wednesday and a Friday. And if you want to support the channel, there's always Patreon as well. But in the meantime, thank you all for watching, and I shall see you on the next one.